So guys, I know we're like literally 2 weeks late on this. The question that's been brought up multiple times in my stream, at least when it was dropping, is wild style worth using? Most notably due to the fact that Bungie has given it a perk refresh. Now this is not something applicable to every weapon. Matter of fact, many of our weapons in our nightfall rotation didn't get a perk refresh, but wild style, a double fire frame solar grenade launcher, did. Now for those that are not familiar with this weapon, this is the second of its kind for this archetype. It is very unique, and the only other grenade launcher like it is Wilder Flight from Spire of the Watcher. Now what this grenade launcher is supposed to provide is a way to deal with high health targets. However, we have had other grenade launchers, most notably Mountaintop, who has returned, which is all about doing high damage to those high health targets. The question is, does wild style hold up in comparison to all of those other grenade launchers, especially given the fact that it is solar and we do have artifact mods, most notably Solar Fulmination, which directly feed into that. Now starting off with our perks in our third column, we have Envious Assassin, Danger Zone, Enlightened Action, Stats for All, Reconstruction, and Grave Robber. Then in our fourth column, we have Incandescent, One for All, Surrounded, Collective Action, Vorpal Weapon, and Bait and Switch. Now taking a look at our third column, we first have Envious Assassin, which reads that defeating targets with other weapons before drawing this one transfers ammo to the magazine from reserves. Now this effect can overflow the magazine based on the number of targets defeated. Now this allows for an overfill up to 200% of the magazine's capacity with a cap of 100% per activation. That means for wild style here, it allows us to get a maximum of 3 shots before needing to reload, which is really nice considering the playstyle of this GL is to really pull out, unload on your enemy, most notably a high health target, champion, whatever, then stow it and continue doing damage with your primary weapon. And the fact that you could do this 3 times is quite impressive. Now the enhanced version of Envious Assassin increases the amount of ammo loaded per kill, that being by 2.5%, meaning on special and heavy weapons, it goes from 20% to 22.5%. On primaries, it goes from 10% to 12.5%, which is pretty much what you'll be utilizing to proc Envious Assassin here. But regardless of whatever it is you're using, since this GL has an ammo count of 1, you'll only need 1 kill to refill or overflow that next shot, which is why Envious Assassin is a top pick for special weapons and is a top pick here. Next up, we have Danger Zone. This is an interesting one. It states that the blast radius of this weapon increases when surrounded by combatants. While active, this weapon deals significantly less damage to the wielder. Now we don't have the exact numbers for the blast radius increase, but when you're within 15 meters of 3 enemies, the perk will activate and increase that blast radius. It also reduces self-damage by 40%, with the effect lingering for 3.5 seconds, with the enhanced version simply adding +5 to the blast radius. Then we have Enlightened Action, where dealing damage improves reload speed and handling. And this stacks up to 12 times, granting an average of +4 to both handling and reload per stack, up to a maximum of +50 at max stacks. Now keep in mind the number of stacks do change depending on the weapon type, although the stacks are invisible. For example, hand cannons get 3 stacks per hit, while automatic weapons get only 1. But for grenade launchers specifically, there isn't an exact number, but I would imagine it would be something around 3 or higher per hit. Now enhanced Enlightened Action increases the bonus at times 12 to 55 rather than 50. Now next up, we have 2 new perks that are added to this weapon with the final shape, which are Reconstruction and Grave Robber. These replace both Unrelenting and Keep Away, which Keep Away was an absolute waste, but these are still pretty interesting options. Let's start with Reconstruction. The weapon slowly reloads itself over time up to double capacity. This will reload 1 shot every 4 seconds and overflow it to 2 shots here on Wild Style with the enhanced version, decreasing the time needed to reload to 3.5 seconds. Reconstruction is an incredible perk for DPS swaps, or even when you're running and gunning. For DPS, you can use this to get some extra burst without needing to reload. Then if you run things like Grandmaster Nightfalls, Reconstruction pretty much means you're always going to have 2 grenade launcher shots ready to blow into a group of enemies or into a champion. Now Grave Robber is also present here, where melee final blows are dealing damage with a charged melee, reloads this weapon's magazine from reserves, with the enhanced version simply adding +5 handling. Definitely not the best perk, even if you are rocking a melee centric build. I would much rather go Envious or Reconstruction just to have 2 or even 3 grenade launcher shots ready to go. Now moving on to our fourth column, we have Incandescent. This is a very good perk for ad clearing. It says that defeating a target spreads Scorch to those nearby. More powerful combatants and opposing guardians cause a Scorch in a larger radius. Essentially guys, on every kill, you'll get a 4-meter explosion, dealing solar damage and also applying 30 Scorch stacks to enemies. Now for higher tier enemies, the explosion radius will increase to 8 meters. And I actually love how that changes depending on the type of enemy that you're killing. Now the enhanced version of Incandescent only applies if we're using using Ember of Ashes. Essentially, Ember of Ashes with Incandescent raises our scorch stacks from 30 to 40, but the enhanced version of Incandescent raises that to 45. Now, if you were to just be rocking this weapon at base with it applying 30 scorch stacks to nearby enemies, that means on average it would take 4 kills to cause a nearby enemy to ignite. This is not something that's super achievable, but with it being a grenade launcher, you can definitely pull it off, considering the AoE blast and whatnot. And with the chaining effects of Incandescent and the higher tier enemies that you can also take advantage of when you get kills on them, you could spark ignitions here with Wildstyle. And when you pair this with mods like Solar Fulmination, you're able to take those ignitions to that next level. I will say selfishly here, guys, and even though I love Prismatic, I urge you that if you do go this route, to go full solar. Take advantage of Ember of Ashes, Ember of Char, rock Solar Fulmination, and combine this with some of your other solar abilities, and you could spark tons of ignitions. Now, I know a lot of you are probably gonna be like, Cross, I'm on Prismatic, I want to rock Transcendence. The hell with rocking a single solar class, even if it is really potent right now with artifact mods. All right, fine. This takes us to our next perk, One for All. Hitting 3 separate targets increases damage for a moderate duration. Essentially, hitting targets within 3 seconds of each other will grant you a 35% increase to your damage, which lasts for 10 seconds. With the enhanced version of One for All lasting 11 seconds versus the base of 10. It's a good perk, guys. I think the main thing that we like about One for All on a grenade launcher is that it's really easy to proc, considering the AoE. You shoot off a grenade launcher shot into a group of enemies, boom, you've got One for All procced. And it's a sizable damage buff, being 35%. Now, Surrounded is also present on this weapon. This weapon gains bonus damage when 3 or more enemies are in close proximity. Essentially, if you are within 15 meters of 3 or more enemies, you will receive a 35% increase to explosive damage and a 40% increase to your impact damage, with it lingering for 1.5 seconds once the condition is no longer met. With the enhanced version picking that up even further, the explosive damage goes up to 41.75% and the impact damage goes up to 47%. Surrounded is a very, very strong perk, but super situational, guys. You've got a grenade launcher. I wouldn't suggest being within 15 meters of your enemies. And sometimes, yeah, that perk will stay procced, no problem. And if you're running around and you're able to like get airborne away from your enemies, then maybe so. But I judge a lot of the weapons that I use based on Grandmaster Nightfalls or even solo dungeons, right? Solo dungeons might be a little bit easier to proc something like this. GMs though, when you're in that type of territory and you make a single wrong move, which results in a grenade launcher shot somehow doing self-damage, boom, that's it. That could literally be you wiping right there in the spot. Now, the last 2 perks in this column that I want to mention are Vorpal as well as Bait and Switch. Both of these have replaced attrition orbs and permeability. Bungie is trying everything they can to get us interested in this perk because yes, those are very solid perks right there. And when you compare this with the rest of the lineup that's already present here on Wildstyle, we've got a lot of very good damage perks. Looking at Vorpal though, it reads that increased damage against bosses, vehicles, and guardians with their super active. Now, the damage buff is dependent on the type of weapon. For instance, on primary weapons, you get a 20% increase in PvE. For special weapons, it's 15%. And on heavy, it's only 10%. So essentially here on Wildstyle, it's a free 15% damage increase to yellow bar enemies, which I know is lower compared to our other damage perks, but it's an easy requirement to meet. Next, we have Bait and Switch. We're dealing damage with all equipped weapons within a short time, gives this weapon a damage boost. Now, this is a 30% damage increase upon dealing damage with all equipped weapons, which lasts for 10 seconds. With the enhanced version of Bait and Switch, increasing the buff duration to 11 seconds. It's a good perk, guys. However, keep in mind, the first shot procs Bait and Switch, meaning you don't have the damage buff until after you shoot that first shot. So it's only the follow-up shots that do take advantage of that damage buff. And if you're manually reloading, that's going to eat up a lot of your time. Now, with those perk choices out of the way, and before we move on to our Godroll, I do need to touch on the origin traits. We have Vanguard's Vindication, where final blows with this weapon grant a small amount of health. And on kill, this restores 10 HP. Nothing game breaking here, guys. Just a nice little thing here to top off some health here and there, especially if you're snagging multi-kills. Next, we have Stunning Recovery, which reads that stunning a champion partially refills your magazine, triggers health regeneration, and improves recovery for a short duration. Now, what this equates to is that when you stun a champion, this refills 25% of the mag from reserves. It also restores 60 HP and grants 40 recovery for 3 seconds. It's a good perk. The problem, there's nothing in our artifact mod that allows us to stun champions with the grenade launcher itself. Now, obviously, you could pull this off with things like Radiant and whatnot, and that's something you could definitely lean into. Now, despite it saying it only loads 25% of your magazine, that doesn't seem to matter here for your grenade launcher. For instance, if you stun a champion with this this GL, say you have Radiance and you stun and bury your champion, this will automatically refill your magazine, which is beautiful because it instantly allows a follow-up shot with your grenade launcher, which for any of these damage buffs, boom, you just got the stun, now you got the buff, time to go to Pound Town. Now our last origin trait is text balance stock. Damaging targets while firing from the hip increases handling, reload speed, and movement speed while aiming down sights. Essentially, upon scoring 4 hip fire hits within 4 seconds of each other, this will grant you 20 range, 20 handling, and 20 reload speed, also a 0.9 times reload duration multiplier, and a bunch of other stuff that really just doesn't apply to a GL. This is a projectile-based weapon, so the whole decreased aim down sights movement speed penalty, as well as the larger precision aim cone, pretty much meaningless here. But that handling and that reload, those are things that you're definitely going to be able to appreciate when you proc this origin traits. Now moving on to our Godroll recommendations. I'm going to give you a few, guys. If you're looking to strictly add clear, the Envious Assassin Reconstruction paired with either Incandescent or One for all day long. Incandescent this season with Solar Fulmination is really good, and Wild Style is able to pull that off beautifully. You're firing 2 grenade launchers at a time, covering even more ground to spread scorch. And when you do land those ignitions with Solar Fulmination and with the right fragments, that being Char and Ashes, you could start a string of ignitions, especially if you're combining this with Hellion or certain solar builds that just aids this even further. And with the ability of Envious Assassin or Reconstruction allowing for more shots, this essentially allows you to fire them back to back, therefore giving you more opportunities to proc those ignitions. Now I bring up One for All because it is a very easy perk to proc on a GL if you're looking for just raw damage. Now another interesting combo is actually Danger Zone and Surrounded. Now I don't like Surrounded. I don't like being this close to enemies when using a grenade launcher, but Danger Zone allows you to do less damage to yourself and it increases the blast radius, with Surrounded providing that massive damage buff even more so when enhanced. So essentially here, guys, you've got 2 perks that are beautifully synergizing here. Now for my folks looking to deal damage to a single target, I think Vorpal or bait and switch is probably your best bet. Keep in mind, bait and switch, you lose out on the damage of that first shot, but the second shot, if it's a reconstruction roll, will take advantage of that 30% buff, which will net out. In Envious Assassin, you'll get that second and third shot with bait and switch. What Vorpal allows is every shot to get that 15% buff. Now keep in mind, even though that is a good roll to deal damage to a single target, context is important. How does this damage compare to, say, something like Mountaintop? Taking a quick look at damage on Coral from both these weapons, with both having Vorpal. Wild Style hits for 48,264 damage, where Mountaintop hits for 57,872 damage. But keep in mind, Mountaintop doesn't have Envious Assassin. It doesn't have Reconstruction. It does have great damage perks, for instance, Recombination. But this also takes us to the point where we break down the numbers individually between these two. How does a Mountaintop, a Godroll Mountaintop, both damage and DPS wise, compare to that of Wild Style? Let's take a quick look at Recombination on Mountaintop. This grants a stacking buff to your weapon when you get an elemental final blow. Now this is really good. It can be from either your weapons or your abilities, and it stacks up to 10 times, with each stack providing a 10% increase in damage, which at 10 stacks grants you 100% more damage. So taking a look here at Carl, at times 10 recombination, we hit for a whopping 100,645 damage, which compared to Mountaintop and Vorpal, that's a 74% increase over that initial shot. But keep in mind, recombination is great for running and gunning, but once that shot is fired, that's it. You have to start fresh from the beginning and then continue building those stacks. Now in the world of Prismatic, it's not hard to build those stacks. But yes, recombination is not the best for long DPS phases. It's just really good when you've got a champion in front of you and you just want to hit him with a chunky amount of damage. For instance, our roll here with recombination has a DPS value of 27,609 with a total damage value of 553,552. But with Vorpal, our total damage over 10 shots is 578,720 with a DPS value of 28,864. And that's because recombination, despite it being fantastic for that one shot, everything else has no buffs. Now let's be real, most of us are not going to be using grenade launchers in this way. We're going to be using it for that single chunky shot to chew down an ad. And for the most part, recombination on Mountaintop maintains the lead over a Vorpal roll up until that 7th shot. It's only past that point where Vorpal pulls ahead on Mountaintop. But with that context out of the way, what does this mean for Wild Style? When we tested the DPS for Wild Style, the same over those 10 shots with both Vorpal and bait and switch. Also keep in mind that since Mountaintop is a kinetic weapon, it does of course do 10% extra damage. So taking a look here at Vorpal, our total damage was 482,640 on Wild Style with a DPS of 20,110. Now, if we move on to bait and switch, keep in mind right here, we had to reproc it twice for those 10 shots, as the buff only lasts for 10 seconds. Also keep in mind that the first shot is not being buffed. So what this really means is that 10 of our shots here, only 7 will be buffed, while 3 will be at base. So with bait and switch active, we hit for 55,850 damage against Coral. Our total damage over 10 shots is 519,836. Again, that's with the 7 shots being buffed. This brings our DPS value though to 18,566. Now the reason for that of course is reproccing bait and switch. That's the fall off there for DPS. Now where things really change though is with perks like Envious Assassin. As mentioned earlier, you can hold up to 3 shots with Envious, allowing you to unload 3 shots back to back very quickly. So with that in mind, if we look at Vorpal again with Envious Assassin, this actually picks up our DPS value to 22,983. And with bait and switch plus Envious Assassin, this picks it up to 22,602. The point of these values here, guys, is just to point out just how good Mountaintop really is. In my opinion, it's the undisputed king if you're looking for a GL to do chunky damage, especially on a high health targets. But also its DPS, despite Envious Assassin being present on Wild Style, is still better on Mountaintop. Now some things I want to wrap up real quickly though for Wild Style is our barrel and mag perks. You see, like Mountaintop, in terms of direct impacts, you want to bring that blast radius as low as possible. You see, spike grenades used to be the say-all end-all, and I will say spike grenades is still good, but implosion rounds was the meta option for Mountaintop. However, here on Wild Style, spike grenades seem to be the better option. When comparing spike grenades with hard launch or even quick launch, our damage is higher here than that of implosion rounds with hard and quick launch. It's interesting because for Mountaintop, the Godroll was actually implosion rounds with hard launch, as that surpassed even the damage of a spike grenade roll. Granted, the difference is marginal, but here on Wild Style, it's interesting to see that spike grenades come out on top. By the way, guys, Wild Style is a very unique weapon, present in a very unique archetype. It's got some solid perk combinations that have only gotten better with the launch of the final shape, and I do believe, especially with mods like Solar Fulmination, and if you're building into Solar, this is a grenade launcher worth snagging. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.